All right, everyone. I hope this is working. I'm trying to record from my computer for the first time. But I'm Lalana Richards. I'm a writing consultant with Purpose Built Schools, and I am the author of Get a Writing Toolkit. And within the Get a Writing Toolkit, there are two components that have been adopted by Purpose Built Schools. One of them is TEAK, which applies to informative and persuasive writing, and the other one is SLEDD, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to kind of go through a PowerPoint here, and that your coaches and your coordinators there at the school can pause this PowerPoint as needed to discuss different elements of it. Excuse me. But the purpose of this is to take you through the 5 steps of SLEDD, which is at first used as a pre-writing stage in the writing process, and then eventually used as a revising stage of the writing process. And I will explain that as we go through the PowerPoint so that it makes more sense. If you have already introduced your students to TEAK, then you may want to do these first 2 slides, which is kind of a game just to make sure kids know the difference on when do I use SLEDD and when do I use TEAK, because believe it or not, that is a very confusing aspect for the children. So I tell them, we review it really quickly, and then I say, hey, we're gonna play a game. I want you to raise your hand in a T. Make a T if you think that you should use TEAK, or raise your hand in a fist if you think we should use SLEDD. They usually have a lot of fun with this. We go through it, and I call on someone to clarify why TEAK was used or SLEDD was used. So if you have not taught TEAK yet, skip this game, of course, and come back to it later when you feel like it would be a good exercise. All right, so let's jump right in. So the pre-writing process for SLEDD consists of sensory language, events, details, and dialogue. And right from the start, I teach the kids a little song to sing with it. I know this doesn't fit everybody's personality, so no worries if you don't want to use it, but I say, sensory language, events stay the same, details and dialogue. Sensory language, events stay the same, details and dialogue. And as funny as it is, they have a blast kind of getting that in their heads. Sensory language, events stay the same, details and dialogue. And then I explain what each of those are as we go through this PowerPoint. So I'm going to go through it with you today, just like I would go through it with the students. So please bear with me and just kind of get a feel for it. So I put a slide up. It can be any picture you want, but I love starting with this one because it gets great results from the kids. And I say, write down one sentence describing what is happening here. So I'd like for all of you to do that right now. So just push pause on this video, take a second, write down one sentence describing what is happening here. And by the way, this is not a time when I want you to show your amazing teacher qualities in creating a fabulous sentence. I want you to write one like a typical 3rd, 4th, or 5th grader would write when asked to write a simple sentence describing this picture. Now that you've written those sentences, go ahead and take a moment to share them out loud so that you can hear each other's sentences. Now, the next thing you're going to do is on that same sheet of paper, I want you to vertically list the 5 senses: see, smell, taste, touch, and hear. I want you to write those down, skip a line between each one, and then write down what the person in this picture is seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, and feeling. If there's one you're not sure about, no problem, just skip it and you can go back to it later or borrow an idea from a friend when we share. But right now, ask yourself, what is this person seeing? And write that down. Okay, let's share some ideas about what the person might be seeing. Now write down some ideas for what this person probably smells at this moment. Here he is, he's running a race. There's obviously people in the bleachers. What do you think he smells? Now let's share some of those answers. All right, taste. This is a tricky one because it's not like he's sitting down eating a bowl of spaghetti right now. But just thinking about where he is and what he's doing, if you had to come up with a taste, what do you think that would be? And write that down. Let's share those out. Okay, so here he is, right? He's probably at a track meet or something. There's a crowd, there's people around him. What do you think he hears? Be very descriptive here, be very specific. Write down what you think he hears. What about touch? Now you can talk about what he feels on him or something that he can touch. Either way you want to look at it. And then share those out when you're finished. Now, when I do this with the students, I tell them, hey, don't worry one bit about borrowing an idea from a friend at this point if you weren't sure what to write. If someone else says something and you think, oh, I love that, that's brilliant, write that down. This is a great opportunity just to kind of expand our vocabularies and, to be honest, make ourselves aware of how broad our vocabularies are. You know, one of the #1 problems that kids have with writing is they say, I don't know what to say. And this really helps with that because you say, oh my goodness, you used words I didn't even know you had. Look at how descriptive you were. I have been blown away, even by my lowest writing groups, with what they come up with here. They'll say, you know, they smell the sweat of their component. They will say that they could taste, you know, sweat in their mouth, that they could taste victory. I heard that one a couple of times last year, that he could taste victory. You know, they'll say everything from they could hear the crowd cheering their name, you know, go Johnny go, to things like he could hear his heart pounding in his chest. For Phil, I heard everything from he could feel the sweat running down his back, to his feet pounding on the ground, to, you know, his elbow hitting the person who accidentally got too close to him. Like I've heard so many wonderful things. So hopefully, especially over the course of time, you'll get some of those from your students as well. So anyway, that's kind of the point here. The point here is to really look at what does the character see, smell, taste, hear, and touch in this scenario in the story. Okay, so once you've done that, you have done the first 2 steps of SLEDD. #1, you answered the question. Here, that was your first sentence. The boy is running, or the boy is running around the track, or whatever it was you came up with first. Second, you brainstorm ideas for the 5 sentences. Step #3 is something you just have to keep in mind. It's not something you actually have to do anything with, and that is events stay the same. In other words, you can't change the story at this point. The character traits have to be consistent with what's already there. The storyline has to be consistent with what's already there. You can't say the boy's going on a picnic when he's really running a race. This translates to the Georgia Milestones test because kids will be asked to rewrite the beginning of the story with more details and dialogue, and all of a sudden they totally change the story. And instead of it being about a boy running a race, it's about a boy who had a picnic with his best friend, because they think they're being so creative when in actuality they're not doing what the question asked them to do. So we just need them to get in the habit of making sure that wherever we start them with a prompt, they continue with that prompt or with that story. So again, step 3, you don't do anything, you just keep it in mind. Step 4 is details. So the story stays the same. The events of the story, stay the same, but details have to be added. And details consist of 3 things: adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. Okay, and that's how I say it to them. Adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. What? Adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. What? Yes, it's silly. This is one of those moments when I'm glad I'm not on video with you. But it really does help them remember that they have to do all 3. You can't just put adjectives in. That's what they want to do. They're most comfortable usually with adjectives, so they want to throw in a couple of adjectives and be done. So they instead of saying that the boy ran, they say that the sweaty boy ran, and they think they're done. And we want them to get away from that. So we say, hey, all 3 things have to be checked throughout your answer before you're done. So that's the detail area, and that's step #4. So we do that step by step when we're teaching it to them. So you say, okay, I want you to go back to your original sentence about the picture, which might be something like the boy is running a race. I want you to circle any nouns in the sentence. So depending upon what they wrote, that will likely be boy or man, race or track. And then for every noun you circled, add an adjective in front of it to describe it. So the sweaty boy, and then you might say that he ran a difficult race, a long race, a fast race. You might say he went around a long track, a never-ending track, a concrete track, whatever you want to say. So they're just adding an adjective in front of the noun of that one sentence, okay? Then you say, okay, find the verb in your sentence. For most of the kids, it's probably run or running. Now replace that verb with a stronger verb to describe what that person is doing. And you can give them a minute to do that by themselves. And then you can give them a moment to share those out. And again, borrow from a neighbor if you want to. So you might have, sprinting, galloping, racing, any of those words. Or what I often find is they come up with ones better than mine. So you would have them make a line through the word running and change it to the verb that is better. So you go ahead right now and do this to yours. You can add whatever adjectives you chose, since I forgot to give you a moment to do that, and put a line through your verb and replace it with a stronger one. All right, moving right along, we're going to go to adverbs. So if you haven't already taught adverbs, it's actually not a big deal. You can kind of teach it here. And then, of course, don't expect them to master it at this point, but you're just introducing it, and then they will be practicing it all throughout the year. And while I'm on that note, same deal with all of these SLEDD concepts. Don't get stuck on one teeny tiny thing like what's an adjective and spend all your time on adjectives when that's not where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. The meat of this lesson, of course, is in adding just details in general. So if any given category is a roadblock, don't worry about that roadblock. Keep going for now to expose them to the entire process. And then we'll go back bit by bit and refine as the year goes on, especially in that small group teacher instruction if you have an opportunity for that in your class. So anyway, back to adverbs. Add an adverb to describe how the person is doing that, doing whatever that verb is. For example, if you said sprinting, you could write sprinting breathlessly. So I'm going to take a moment to pause once again and for you to go back and add an adverb with your verb. Okay, so at this point you have completed, oh my goodness, it says steps 1 through 3 when it should say steps 1 through 4. Glad that we edited there. All right, so you have answered the question. You've brainstormed ideas for the 5 senses. You know that events stay the same, so you're keeping that in your head. And you've added adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. So now what? What do you think the runner would be saying to himself right now? Write that down. Be sure to use quotation marks and proper punctuation and capitalization. I have revising and editing here. I'm going to take that out because we're going to talk about the writing process later. But this is the next step in SLEDD. The last D in SLEDD stands for dialogue. So they just aren't going to score well in the Georgia milestones or have any kind of engaging narrative at any point in their life if they don't include dialogue. So we keep it really simple here, and you can say, what would the runner be saying to himself? If they want to write what the runner is going to say to somebody else, that's fine too. But just because there wasn't someone else in the picture, I kept it simple. If they don't know how yet to punctuate dialogue, then I would just start with putting quotation marks. Say, and show them what that is on the board, and say whatever you decide to have him say, put that within quotation marks. And then bit by bit, you can teach them the full rules for the comma and the capitalization necessary in dialogue. All right, then what happens? So now you've completed the 5 steps of SLEDD, which is the pre-writing process when we're at this stage. And you're ready to rock your answer. At this point, you go back through and you put everything together. You insert the sensory language wherever you see fit, and you be sure to change the verbs and add the adjectives and adverbs and at least 1 line of dialogue. As confusing as that sounds, I always give them an example. I pick up someone's paper at this point, and I start at the top, or you can use mine. My original sentence was, a boy is running around a track. I came up with, he will see the finish line, he will smell the fresh air, he will taste a dry mouth, he will hear the crowd cheering, and he will touch or feel the sweat dripping down his back. And then I literally go through in order just to show them an example of how you could put it all together. Okay, so for example, you could say, actually, before I do that, I show them how I went ahead and I added my adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. Okay. And then I also went through and added adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs wherever I found it was applicable in my 5 senses. You don't have to have them do that if you're not quite ready for that yet, but I did do that. And then here's where I added the dialogue that I came up with in the red print. So this is just showing them how I did the steps. Then I put it all together, just following an order here. A young, strong boy is sprinting breathlessly around a racetrack. He can see the finish line up ahead, and he smells the cool, fresh air entering his lungs. He tastes his dry mouth and longs for water, but he is motivated by hearing the crowd cheering wildly. As he feels the sweat dripping down his back, he says to himself, "You can do this!" In one final burst of speed, he crosses the finish line and is victorious. So this, if we're talking about the writing process again, the first 5 steps right now, we're calling that our pre-writing. When we put it all together like this is us making a draft now. And literally, if you go back, I really just went in order. I wrote my revised sentence right here when I added my adjectives and adverbs. And then I went through and said he could see the finish line up ahead. He could smell the cool, fresh air entering his lungs. He could taste a dry mouth. He heard the crowd cheering wildly, and he felt the sweat dripping down his back. And then I added how he heard the crowd screaming, "Go Maurice," and he said to himself, "You can do this." I tacked on a concluding sentence, but of course that's not necessary at this stage in the process. Excuse me. So the big deal here is for them to see, oh my goodness, once I have done the brainstorming like I did, I really can zoom through writing this draft. And I love picking up like 2 or 3 different kids' papers and doing just this for them, reading their sentence that they came up with, and then going through their sensory language and dialogue, just the way I did with my own. All right, so what happens next? You want to tell them, hey, you revised as you did this in a way because you were putting in words, inserting words here and there to make your story flow better. Like I added that concluding sentence, which wasn't part of the original plan, just because you're trying to make your writing more fluid and more complete. But then you always have to edit. So here, I purposefully took out things that were necessary to be there and to create some editing errors. This one is something I would give to my high-level kids because there are no hints on where the errors lie. But then this is a differentiated version. So this gives a hint. Every highlighted area has an error, but it doesn't say what the error is. So there's a way that you could differentiate this process while you're teaching it. And then here is your answer key. Okay, so what is it that we need to do again? Number 1, we do the 5 steps. That's our pre-writing process. Number 2, we put it all together. That's our drafting. Then we revise, then we edit, then we publish or turn it in. Now, again, when you're revising right now at this point, I would only have them revise for adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs. And then I would have them, if they want to add any additional details or concluding sentences or anything like that. For editing, I would choose probably these things right here: commas, end marks, and capitalization. Unless you have an advanced class and they're ready for something more, then of course do it. Spelling, of course, is always a great one to add on, especially if there are particular words you're focused on right now. So then I have this fun little quiz, and of course they're all like, quiz, but it's super easy. And we can just do it orally, or you can do it on paper if you want, but I usually just do it orally. I ask the students, hey, first, can you list the 5 steps? And I remind them of the song, which they're not gonna know at this point. You gotta do it a million times before they know it, but sensory language, events stay the same. Details and dialogue. That's SLEDD, but before you can do SLEDD, you have to answer the question. So that's the first step, is answer the question, which was when we wrote that sentence. And then it's sensory language, events stay the same, details and dialogue. All right, what do you do next? My hint here is, what's the next step in the writing process? Well, of course, that is your draft. You've already done your pre-writing, now you got to do your draft. Then what? You edit and revise, or if you want those separately, you can say, then what? Then next. And then what do you do last? If you want to keep it all completely separate, that you revise, then you edit, and then you publish, okay? I'll put down here, think, writing process. Okay, so here's your answer key. And then I tell them, nice work. Now, the next slide is just for you, the teacher, and it says, hey, all right, this is all great. This gets them introduced to it. This gets them excited, I hope. They really have a lot of fun with this. They really do. But okay, now what do I do? How do I apply this to a full story? Well, you start, like we just did, by applying SLEDD to 1 sentence or 1 picture. And you can do this super easily for 5 days in a row after you've taught it. So yes, the initial day takes some time, usually at least 30 minutes to have kids do it well. After that day though, you just put a sentence on the board. The girl ran from the bear. And that's all you put. And you say, apply SLEDD to this sentence. So they have to write down see, smell, taste, touch here. And they have to write down what the girl is seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and hearing. Then they have to go back and add adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs to the sentence. Then they have to write it all out as a paragraph. and then you can stop there if you want for that day, and the next day have them revise and edit and add dialogue, or, you know, however you want to see fit. But so, you know, but at least have them practice this 2 or 3 times before you have them go on to number 2, because then they get really comfortable with it. Then you say, okay, now we're going to apply SLEDD to a small moment. Have them brainstorm some favorite memories, come up with a list of as many as they can, and then say, okay, now pick one. And then once they pick one, you say, okay, now we need to narrow that down to one moment within that story that we can explode and really talk about in detail. And so I love to use a sports example because they're so easy to illustrate. So I might say, you know, one time I had a championship basketball game where I was fortunate enough to make the game-winning shot. So instead of telling the whole story about the whole game, though, I'm going to pick that moment when the guard passed me the ball and then I got my shot off. So I'm only going to talk about from when the minute I got past the ball, what was going on in my head, to the minute I released the ball and it went into the hoop, and then my story ends. So it's only about a minute or less of my story, my actual story, right? But I'm going to blow it up and explode it and apply SLEDD to it. So you do that and you practice that a couple of times where you're doing this with small moments. And then you can decide if you want to take all of these through the whole writing process in terms of editing and revising, or if you're just wanting to focus on the drafting and then you want to come back later and pick 1 or 2 to take through the entire process, which is often what I do just for the sake of time. But it's very important that you do take at least 1 or 2 examples through the entire process. So then you're ready to apply this to a longer narrative. So you have students draft their entire story, you know, whatever you decide to use. If you're going to use a story arc, if you're going to use an organizer that has beginning, middle, and end. And if you want an organizer or some different ideas for organizers for narrative writing, I'd be happy to email you several different examples. I saw a great one this morning where up at the top, it's asked what the event was. Then it said, why is this event significant to you? And then it had SLEDD, where students had to fill out the aspects of SLEDD. And then it had boxes for beginning, middle, and end. And that was their pre-writing for the longer narrative. So at this point, when you're doing number 1 or number 2, then SLEDD, you know, goes through the whole process. But when you're doing number 3, SLEDD is used as in the revising process. You go through and you write your entire story, and then you apply SLEDD to it as if it were the Georgia Milestones test, and they've been asked to revise the story by adding more detail and dialogue. So SLEDD guides the revision process once you get to this part. So in other words, you say, okay, now look at your story. Go through your story. Where can you add more sensory language? You know, where could you add more detail about what the character sees, smells, tastes, touch, and hears? Where could you add more adjectives, adverbs, and strong verbs? Where could you add more dialogue? And then they go through and revise and edit and publish as normal. Okay, well, hopefully that gives you a great place to start with SLEDD. I am always available for questions. I love getting emails. What I can do right now is add a new slide right here for my contact information. All right, so you can reach out to me at L. Richards. Whoa, purposebuiltschools.org. My phone number, and you are welcome to call it. I don't care if we've never met, you can call me and let me know how I can walk you through it. If you have any stumbles along the way, I'd love to hear about them too, because I know if I hear about things you're struggling with, someone else somewhere is struggling with that as well. So I appreciate you taking the time to go through it, and I hope to hear how things are going soon. Thank you so much.